Hello, Sharon. It's so good to have you here today.
Hey, Shanti. Pleased to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. In the recording studio beforehand, when we were sound checking, I asked Sharon to share how wonderful the weather is where she is, which is in Barbados, one of my favorite places I've ever been. And she shared with me that it's as beautiful as I thought, which made me feel as chilly as I thought I would feel sitting here in New Jersey. But it's really great to have you here. I met Sharon through LinkedIn, which I'll talk about in a minute. She's a former journalist and freelancer who is now an author, educator, and anti-racism activist. She does this in a variety of ways. She has Sharon's anti-racism newsletter, which is now in its 5th year with more than 5,500 subscribers and growing. She's also the author of Tired of Racism, True Stories of Existing While Black, in which she offers unique perspectives gathered from her opportunity to live in many different places in the world, including the Caribbean, the UK, and the US, and other places I'm probably forgetting. She's able to really share through multiple lenses in a way that other people wouldn't be able to. When we were speaking previously, she shared with me a belief that community is the answer to the ills of the world, and for that reason started an anti-racism community. She also shared in that conversation that, quote, equality means honoring the humanity in others, unquote, which just hit me right in the heart, and feeling a call to use her gifts to spread the message. I admired her work and voice on LinkedIn. This was a first for me. I reached out to connect, and Sharon reached back out to accept the connection and say, hey, what had you reaching out to me? I just had this intuitive hit to go for it, so to speak, and tell her about the podcast and see if she might be interested in exploring being a guest. So I shared the trailer with her. And she actually took the time to explore and listen to the trailer and came back and said, "Ooh, I really like the trailer. I'd love to be a part of it." She didn't know me from a hole in the wall and took the time to be open and curious and learn. I think that exemplifies honoring the humanity in others and the power of connection, which is everything that she told me she stands for. So that brings us here to this moment. I'm so glad to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Shanti. It's funny, you send out all these connections or you send out responses on LinkedIn, and what you get back can be very varied. Some people don't respond at all. Some people try to sell you something right away. And sometimes you can just tell that there's something more there, that there's a connection, that there's a humanity, there's something.
Yeah.
And that's rare. Funnily enough, that is rare. And so I'm really appreciating the way that we connected.
Me too. And thank you. That was very lovely of you to say. I appreciate it. So I said a bit about what you do professionally. Please add anything that you'd like to add to what I've already shared with the listeners.
I am definitely someone who has trouble settling to just one thing, right? And so, both in my career and in what I currently do, I have a number of irons in the fire. As you alluded to, I was a journalist, a trade journalist. I was a journalism lecturer. And now I've been using my gifts really to educate people. Aside from the newsletter and my book, I've also been trying to help people to get their voice out there. So, I run a self-publishing masterclass. Last year, I ran a couple of times what I called my newsletter launchpad class, which is to help people start their newsletters. And I'm also currently doing support offering for introverts, particularly focused on Black women, just because I'm an introvert myself. And I really believe that introversion is neither a superpower nor is it a deficit. But once you know this about yourself, you can work with it.
Tell us anything that you might want us to know about you personally, something maybe people don't know or something that lights you up.
Lesser known but known is that I'm a Reiki master. I've been doing Reiki since 2006. So, I'm 18, nearly 19 years in. Something I don't talk about a lot at all is weekly pub quiz with a team because I enjoy trivia.
Oh, tell me more
So
about
that might be the first time I've actually said that on a podcast.
Okay, so weekly pub quiz right there in Barbados somewhere?
Right there, Barbados gets a lot of British visitors. It was a former British colony. And so there are people here, but not only expats, but also locals who enjoy pub quizzes. Yeah, that's a thing.
That's terrific. And you enjoy it? Do you get super competitive about it or just for fun?
Kind of depends on how it's going. If it looks like we have a chance of winning, then yes, I can get a little competitive. If we haven't got a snowball's chance, then I just enjoy it for fun.
Beautiful. Love it. Awesome. So, what are your pronouns, please?
My pronouns are she and her.
Terrific. And since this is a campfire style interview series where underrepresented people talk about the extra layers we navigate as we wind our way into the already complicated career landscape, could you tell us a little bit more about who you are and your navigating your career as an outsider story?
I am a Black woman, obviously, born in England, raised in the Caribbean, right? Returned to England to work as an adult. Lived in France for a year, visited the US many times. And it's one of those weird things where, no matter where I am, I never quite feel like I fit in. Built most of my freelance career right here in Barbados, but my clients were mostly from the US, the UK, and Canada. I didn't work locally, I worked globally, which I guess when people get to know me, that's not really a surprise at all.
Yeah. And I alluded to that up front that you have unique perspectives because you have uniquely lived in many more places than most of us have the opportunity to live. You shared with me some stories about experiencing racism when you were younger that ultimately informed your path and your journey into your career now and the powerful work that you're doing. There was one I remember you talking about when you were roughly 21 years old and we were with a roommate, and I'll let you
Oh,
take it
yeah.
from there. Yeah.
I lived in France for a year when I was 21, 22-ish. And I had a roommate who was from the Midwest in the US. You know how it is when you're that age, right? You get together with people and you don't have to have very much in common to think it's a good idea to share space, right?
Right.
We both needed somewhere to live. We figured we could afford a place together. And so we did that. But it became very obvious as time went on that she had not had a lot to do with Black people before. And actually, given what I learned subsequently about the region that she grew up in, that is actually hardly a surprise. I believe that she was from one of those towns where most Black people ended up leaving or being ejected.
Yeah. Yeah.
There were lots of little things. She kept saying, "Oh, but the Black people I've come across in the States aren't like this. Oh, they're not like you." Some of the things that surprised her, for example, I was fluent in French and she was not, even though we had both studied French. I had been speaking French every day since the age of 14 because I was in a language stream at school. So it's not really a surprise. She was surprised at what I knew about the world, given that I came from a small island, right? She was surprised at the lifestyle that I said that I had. Again, completely going against her perception of what a Black person from a small island in the Caribbean should be like.
Right.
And then one day she said to me, and this was a thing that kind of shut my mouth, she said, "I don't think of you as Black at all. I think of you as white." As I said, I was 21. I actually did not know what to do with that, Shanti. I had no idea.
Yeah.
What I recall is that after gaping at her, I picked myself up, left the flat, and walked around for 4 hours while my brain tried to process what had just gone on. And I did eventually go back. And I said something, not what I would have said now. Now I would have said, "But you don't see all of me. You're not seeing my identity. You're erasing a part of me." I would have said all of that. I did not have that vocabulary then. I don't even remember what I said,
You did the best you
but
could
I
in the
think I
moment.
did. I did the best I could in the moment. It wasn't great. It wasn't how I would handle it now.
Do you remember how it unfolded? Did she kind of get what you were trying to say, or?
She never repeated it. Yeah, I'll say that. She never repeated it. I don't know if she ever fully got it because, from her point of view, she was being complimentary because whiteness is the highest standard to which you could aspire to under the way that she thought.
It sounds like, too, that there was almost a blind side for you that you had never understandably considered that someone might say that or view the world through that lens. Can you describe a little bit what did that blind side feel like? It cracked you open a little bit, it sounds like.
It had never even occurred to me. Now, as I said, I grew up in the Caribbean and I grew up at a particular time that's important to this story in a sense, because it was immediately post independence, right? That's when I was born. So in the 70s, a lot of Black Caribbean people who had been born British were discovering their Caribbean and Black identity in a space in which it was finally safe to explore that in its fullness. My parents wore African inspired clothing. They encouraged us to have afros or natural hair. They played Black music. They read books by Black authors. This is not to say that I didn't also occasionally experience racism, because it gets everywhere. I had not considered that there was anything wrong with being Black by anybody else's standards, nor had I considered that whiteness was a standard to aspire to. I knew that there were white people, obviously. You don't grow up in the Caribbean without knowing that. I knew that because of the post-colonial heritage, many of them were well off in a way that some others were not. I knew that they had certain attitudes because of it, and still do to this day, some of them. But none of that had caused me to think of myself as less than, because they always say, if you can see it, you can be it, which is true up to a point. And so, because of where I grew up, what I saw around me was I saw Black doctors and lawyers and professionals, service people, and people filling pretty much every role in the society. The one thing I didn't see as many of was business owners, right? I didn't see as many really wealthy Black people because of the history, but I could still look around and see excellence around me. And often I say to people that I have a certain amount of humility also, even as I continue to show up. Because the people that I went to school with include world famous research scientists and world leaders. And I think that has an effect on you. So I say all that to say that when she said what she said, it caught me completely by surprise. And I didn't understand where she was coming from.
Yeah.
Again, I know a lot more now.
The kind of comparative relativity of what she was trying to bring to the equation was mind exploding and brand new.
For sure, for sure. I think racism exists everywhere. I've experienced it pretty much everywhere. I think the France experience was my first time living out of the Caribbean since my babyhood. There were lots of experiences. I remember when the same roommate and I went to pay our first rent because we had done everything at one remove. And when the landlady saw me turn up, she said, I'd never have rented to you if I'd known you were Black.
Oh, that's true before.
Yeah. There were a lot of stories. I realized that at that particular juncture, there were a lot of people who had not had day-to-day contact with Black people, had been influenced by what they thought they knew, and therefore did not know what to make of me, basically a middle-class girl from Barbados who had a great education. It is not about France.
Yeah.
It is about the edifice of racism and about the things that people believe that affect how you're going to be treated.
As these stories start to compile, what starts to shift for you? How do you start to, I don't know how else to describe what I imagine must be self-protect?
I didn't have a lot of skills in that area when I was 21. Like most Black people, my very first experience of racism happened when my age was still in single digits. I think I was about 7, and a white guy in Trinidad called me the N-word, which I still remember. I think I got to a point where, and I know we talked about this, you can live in that space of anger and pain, or you can choose to do something different. And I came out acknowledging that this had happened, acknowledging that it sucked, but also determined that I was not going to inflict that on anyone else.
Also not going to let it sit in your heart, so to speak.
Not let it affect my self-image. And this is not to say that every time you experience racism, it hurts. There's no getting away from that.
Yeah.
But also does not change my perception of who I am. And that is really thanks to the foundation that my parents gave me and the fact that I was privileged to grow up at that time in those places where there were not as many competing messages.
In the coaching that I do, that's such an important part. And that sense of self, that getting back to your essence, remembering who you really are at your core, that can be a difficult and long journey for people, understandably, because life takes you in a lot of interesting directions. If you can stay rooted in who you are, then these things that start happening to you or at you, you're grounded, you're okay, and you can navigate through the moments with a certain amount of grace. Not that it doesn't hurt, like you said, but you're centered, you're clear-headed, and you can move through it. Does that feel right?
To a certain extent, it does, Shanti. But I think some of it is stuff that I came to terms with after the experience rather than when I was going through it. Because again, from the age I am now, 21 was very young. Okay? It's one of those ages where you think you know a lot about everything, but you may not know quite as much as you think you do.
Yeah.
And you're probably still forming yourself into the person that you're going to become.
Yes.
So for me, that was a pivotal point because it would have been very easy to go down the I hate everybody because of this racism, but I didn't. And I remember making a deliberate choice that I was not going to do that.
Yeah.
I didn't know then what that was going to lead to down the road, but I knew that was not how I wanted to live. And now that I know more about myself, it seems very in keeping with the person that I am.
So,
I'm not sure that I had that level of self-awareness at the time when I made the decision, to
yeah,
be honest.
you had just enough self-awareness to get through it in the moment. Yes, that makes sense. Let's start to pivot toward your career now. And I know from our previous conversation that everything that unfolded with George Floyd was really a pivotal flip a switch moment for you that called you to use your voice and guide you on the path that you're on now. So, having experienced everything that you had already experienced, which was fairly consistent racism, what was it about that moment that said, okay, now this is it. Enough's enough, and it's time for me to do something new?
Yeah, I have to go back a little bit to say that having finished my year in France and returned to live in the Caribbean, then I decided I wanted to know more about the country of my birth. So I returned to England for what was intended to be a short time and ended up being 15 years. And so I lived and worked there, marriage, kid, all that sort of thing, but also experienced racism there. And the reason that is important is because George Floyd's murder made me reflect on the racism that I had experienced and that I knew others had experienced in my life, in our lives. And I started writing. It was cathartic. Now, it wasn't the first time I had written something about racism because I had written bits here and there. And I'd actually done a research project on colorism, which I had written up, and that turned into a book eventually. But at that time, I had not really shared some of my workplace experiences from the UK. And so I started writing on Medium to start with. I think I started with an essay called While Black Thoughts on the Assumption of Wrongness, the idea that wherever you are, you're not supposed to be and you're up to no good. And then I started my Working While Black series, sharing lots of different experiences.
Please remember where you are, but could you share a defining story from your career about workplace racism that you experienced?
Oh, yes, I certainly can. There are two experiences that come to mind. The most obvious one was when a colleague and I applied for the same job. We got on well. We applied for the job and we compared CVs. We helped each other. And she said, "Oh, man, your CV is so much better than mine. You're definitely going to get to the job." I said, "Yeah, we don't know, but let's just do our thing." I had a lot more work experience than she did in the areas that they said they were looking for. So we both got called for an interview. Now, bear in mind, we are talking 90s, pre-social media, and my name is Sharon Hurley. Nobody knows. That does not read black, so to speak. For people that are looking at CVs, at resumes, they're not saying, "Oh, this is a black woman." As far as they were concerned, because my colleague had Irish ancestry, I believe Hurley is also an Irish name. So that's what they thought. They thought they were interviewing two Irish women. Right?
Yep.
And I walk through the door and they do this. They go back. For the people who are listening, I'm just doing like a visible double take. And I knew immediately that I was not who they had been expecting. I did the interview. Nonetheless, I did a great interview, if I say so myself. And so my colleague and I get on the train on the way back and said, "I think I flubbed that." I said, "My interview was really terrible." I said, "Mine was okay." And so fast forward a week or two and she gets a job offer and I do not. Now, the reason that was so clear, if you were doing it objectively and looking at experience on the CV and how the interview was handled, I should have got that job, but I didn't.
Plus, there was the visible reaction to you entering a
Plus,
room,
there was a
which
visible reaction.
I
Yeah.
can't even imagine how that must feel.
That happened all the time. I went to apply for another job, which I eventually got. And one of the people on the interview panel said, "How come I didn't want to go work for a black paper?"
Oh,
Right?
how do you respond to that? Do you remember how you responded to that?
I actually said something along the lines, "I'm a person in the world and I'm interested in everything." Or the way I put it in my newsletter recently is there's no such thing as a black topic. But I did get the job eventually, mainly because I think the CEO really liked me because I'd done a pre-interview with him. But he knew that I had the experience that he wanted. And so I think that was why I got the job. But there was this one guy on the interview panel who was not in favor of it at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's again that idea that people will look at you and make assumptions and underestimate you. The other experience was that I had applied for promotion at somewhere that I was working, and it came with a certain salary increase. And then after I got the promotion, they came up with an excuse not to give me the salary increase, the full salary increase. They gave me half of it. But they gave my other colleague who had been promoted the full salary increase. My other colleague was white.
Goodness. And did you confront them about it or speak to them about it?
I did speak to them about it, but I didn't really get anywhere. People will gaslight you into anything.
Yeah.
And again, I think I was in my mid 20s then. From my mid 30s onwards, though, I had a lot more confidence in where I was coming from with things. And so those conversations would have gone very differently had it been 10 years later.
That's interesting. How might you have handled that same situation with getting half of the increase today?
I would definitely have, because I knew this from my colleague, I would have pointed out that there were two of us. I would have pointed to my record and the person's record if I knew it, and I would have said, this is what you promised, this is not what you delivered. So this is unequal and unfair. And then at that point, I would probably have left. I would have left the job. I would have started looking for a new job immediately as well, because they would have proved that they couldn't be trusted.
And that's, I think, part of what we learn as we go through life too, is that there's always other opportunities out there. I know I felt extremely married to my first job opportunity, and I was shocked and dismayed to realize how painful it was when that separation happened, and vowed to never let that happen again. Not that I didn't take my work seriously and not that I didn't fully invest myself in it and create strong relationships, but you do start to realize over time that it's a big world out there.
Yeah, and many companies, especially in a corporate setting, you leave today, they replace you tomorrow.
That's it. Yeah.
You can do a good job without giving over your whole life and being. I've always been 100% committed to whatever I've had to do. I aim to be excellent. And I also know that there are other opportunities out there. And there are certain things that are not worth compromising on. I've known that in the last couple of decades in a way I probably didn't know it in the first couple of decades of my work life.
So when that organization violated your trust, if it were today, it would be, okay, got it. I appreciate the clarity. Gotta go.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotta go.
On the door.
All right. So George Floyd's murder gets you to writing. You're feeling it be cathartic. What continues you into the really expansive work that you're doing now? Because it just keeps unfolding for you.
So I realized around the same time, because at this point I was a freelance writer, mainly writing about digital marketing. So I transitioned out of being a paid journalist in an office and out of being a lecturer into freelancing. And I had moved to Barbados by this time. I'd moved back to Barbados. I realized very shortly after that writing about digital marketing wasn't the best use of my time, skills, and it had nothing to do with my purpose.
Yep.
And so my first transition was away from digital marketing to writing more about DEI and anti-racism for some of my clients or getting a couple of new clients. It's been a case of shifting and adding. I'm thinking more expansively about what that purpose is and the things that I've done in my life so far, because the things I'm most expert in are writing and teaching. And how do I use those to inspire others, to educate others, to raise awareness? So the newsletter is about letting people know what's going on and actually urging them to action, because that's shifted from what was sharing experiences to sharing experiences with the aim of awareness and action. That's turned into launching a community last October, the Share Anti-Racism community, which is about learning and action. The accountability piece is huge, and also micro reparations. Part of the membership goes into a reparations fund, and we use it to support other creators. Because I feel that we can all do something, even if it's small.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that you give somebody $50 and that lets them buy a meal that they might have not bought, or it lets them do a household job, or it pays a bill. Even when you're doing something small, don't underestimate what a difference it can make to people. I think that the anti-racism work is a foundation, and the empowering people through learning experiences is another important pillar. The newsletter comes out 10 times a month. most months.
That's amazing. My first thought is, wow, like where do you come up with all of that content? And yet I'm listening to your story and I understand where you came up with all that content, but it's staggering, really.
There's always something. And again, my discipline as a journalist and writer comes into play. Sometimes I have stuff there in the bank, and other times I'm pulling my hair out at the last minute. I try not to do the latter too often.
Yeah. You talk about everything being anchored in learning and action. Can you share from an anti-racism, allyship standpoint, what are a couple of the most powerful actions that people can take?
I'd say that one of the most powerful things is to notice and act in the moment. If they are able to do, people are being spoken over or ignored. If, somebody else is taking credit for their ideas. If somebody says something that is outrageous and either is a dog whistle or is overtly racist, calling that out in the moment and letting that person feel supported. That is a lot more impactful than coming to the person afterwards and saying, oh, that was so terrible. And by putting a stake in the ground, so to speak, this is something that you are not going to tolerate. I saw an example this morning, which actually reminded me of a story that I tell, because quite often you would go into a space as a Black person, as a Black woman, and people would assume that you were there to serve the tea or clean up the room or something. And I read a story, I can't remember where, this morning, where a global majority woman went into a room and one of the men in the room said, oh, yes, I'd like a cup of tea. And a male ally said, I'll show you where the tea is.
Yeah.
It can be as simple. It can be as simple as that. And the other thing you can do within the workplace is create opportunities. Create opportunities. Speak people's names into rooms where they are not.
Tell me more about that, please.
So, for example, when you're in a board meeting, you're in a management meeting, and they're saying, who should we assign this project and so on? Pick your Black or global majority colleague that you know is excellent and advocate for that person to be considered instead of having the room just do what it normally does and consider only the white men and then the white women. Yeah. And sometimes you're going to have to actually advocate, not just speak the name into the room, but also fight a little bit for that person to get the recognition, put those people up for promotion, send opportunities their way, mentor people, support people.
Yeah. I was just having this conversation with, her name is Sandy Cusano, and she's an Asian American woman. And this reality that if you're navigating from the outside, whether you're LGBTQ plus or Black or Asian or disabled, you're starting on a not even playing field. And
For sure.
That's where I think the advocating, not just speaking someone's name, but advocating, having this awareness that the playing field's not even. So I'm not just going to say their name, but I'm actually going to build a case that's based on my true experiences of them and the awareness that they could probably use an extra little boost in the situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Ask questions. Ask questions about your policies. Ask questions about the hidden assumptions. What counts as professional hair or attire? Which are the holidays that the corporation is going to celebrate and honor? All those sorts of things.
And if you
Right?
encounter something that doesn't feel right, then speak up about it.
Then speak up about it.
Yeah.
Let people know that you're paying attention. Let your Black and global majority colleagues know that you are in their corner. And they're not going to believe it if you say it, but if you're consistently speaking their names, making sure that they're being heard, then you will start to build that trust.
It was interesting to me when you talked about that example with the colleague that said, I'll show you where the tea is. And because I think that I'll just speak for myself. I think I often jump to some sort of slight that then needs to have the ally stand up and pound a table and point fingers and scream, right? And it doesn't need to, maybe it does need to be that in some cases. I think the simple things, and I just love that example of a way that you can advocate in a subtle but powerful way. And
yes, because I think it is also important to avoid descending into saviorism.
Can you talk about that? Because I believe I know what you mean when you say that, and I'd love to hear you explain it a little bit more.
Well, the classic example is, your mission trip, right? That's not a work example, but that is a classic example. You're going to this place where all these people are poor and needy, and you're going to lift them out of wherever they are. It underlies this idea that all these indigenous places lacked civilization before white people turned up.
Yeah.
But in a work setting, it shows up in a lot of ways. I remember working with someone. I had just moved to the area. And so I was getting myself settled, and she was really helpful when I was getting a car and I was trying to find somewhere to live and I was setting up a bank account. And because it was like a one horse town, literally, that had one bank, which was not the bank that I banked with. She helped ferry me around and get all that set up. But as I got settled and I knew what I was doing, she got chillier and chillier. So she liked the idea of being able to help me. The reason that gave me a bit of an inkling is because one day, another of these jaw-dropping moments, she said to me, "I'm really disappointed you don't have a more ethnic name."
A more ethnic name. Oh, wow.
I didn't respond. I just looked at her.
I was going to ask
You
what
know,
she
I,
said, but I really,
I mean, no, I didn't respond. I didn't respond.
yeah.
That did not require a response from me. So yes, you have to avoid that because honestly, allyship, accomplishment, advocacy, it should not be equated to saviorism. You are doing what you're supposed to do as a human being who values other human beings. You're not saving anybody, and people are not looking for saviors either.
I will ask you one more question if it's okay. This has come up on the podcast before. How do you step in powerfully as an ally? And how do you overcome the fear of potentially saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing? I'm not 100% sure what's unfolding. I can sense that there's something that needs to be said, but I'm really afraid of. And then I don't want to appear to be a savior. I don't want to overstep. I don't want to use the wrong air quotes language. I've found myself in these situations in the past where that tape starts rolling and then the moment's passed and I'm quiet. How would you recommend we move through those moments?
You have a couple of options. First of all, depending on the situation, if you have the chance to check in with the colleague that has been target of racism, you might be able to say, "Are you okay for me to say something about this?" That shows that you have noticed it, that you're in their corner. They may not want it tackled. Be led by that person. Okay. If it is so egregious that you know that you have to say something, but you're not sure what to say, you can question the person. Why do you think that? What did you mean by that? I think you may have forgotten this. Whatever it is, you don't necessarily have to be super confrontational. You can sometimes you can ask a question to get them to think again.
Yeah.
And you have to accept that you're going to make mistakes.
Perfectionism is my Achilles heel. So yes.
Yeah, I'm a recovering perfectionist myself.
Yeah. I try to say recovering as well. Okay. So when I make a mistake, now what?
So you make a mistake and you apologize. You own that you have made a mistake. You apologize and you ask how you can repair.
Simple.
When we have kids, right? And they are at that very young age where they're wresting toys from other kids and somebody might get pushed over and start to cry and you say sorry, right? You say sorry. You say give them a hug. In other words, own that you made a mistake, apologize for it, and make an attempt to repair.
Yep.
That's what in an ideal world we teach our kids.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we have to do ourselves.
So chances are if I step in with a good heart and good intentions, I'll probably do the moment justice. I'll probably show up in the right way. And worst case scenario, eventually I'm going to make a mistake, which is good because it means I keep trying. And then I just own it and apologize.
That's how you learn. That's how you learn. And the other important side of that is remember that there's no expectation. Nobody has to accept your apology or give you grace. You still have to do what you know is right. Sometimes people are too hurt or upset. They don't want to hear it. Yeah. You have to accept that as well. It shouldn't stop you from trying again. You just learn and you do better next time.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think I'm going to pivot us to the segment of my podcast that I call It's My Podcast, so there will be music. And I'll ask you what I ask all guests, which is if there were one song you could put in a time capsule and preserve at all costs for future generations, what would it be and why?
Oh my gosh. I always have trouble with questions like this because there are so many. Can I have two?
Okay, sure. I let one other person have two, so I absolutely.
Okay,
You
so
asked so
then
nicely.
I would have Imagine by John Lennon, and I would have A Change Is Gonna Come. I think it's Sam Cooke. Is that right? Yes, it is Sam Cooke. Yeah.
What about those two? I guess I'm interested in each of them and relative to each other as well.
Okay, so A Change Is Gonna Come seems particularly pertinent in the moment that's going on in the US and globally because it reminds us to resist. It reminds us that terrible status quo doesn't have to stay that way. And so we keep doing what we need to do. And Imagine just carries on that message. This is what's on the other side of that. When that change comes, imagine that world. Imagine no war. Imagine no possessions. Imagine a world beyond capitalism. Imagine a world where everyone's humanity is valued, where everyone gets needs met. So I think the two fit together really well.
It's such a tough moment in history right now. I've worked very hard to maintain a positive mind frame while being informed and remain hopeful while sometimes really getting walloped by what I see. Do you ultimately remain hopeful? It sounds like. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do. I do. I'm not necessarily on the day to day, but overall, and I take hope from the fact that in spite of the terrible news that we get from different parts of the world every day, there are also people out there fighting for what is right, honoring our shared humanity, trying to change things so the world is better for everyone.
Yes.
And I have to believe that those people, we are the people that are going to eventually win out. Have to believe it.
I that's what I hold on to as well. And there's just this image I have of a ever expanding positive ripple effect that reaches a critical mass and kind of washes over. And I'm either naive or not, but I'm going to stay with
Well,
you on that thought.
one of the analogies that I've been using a lot recently is that all of us are like drops of water.
Mhm.
And eventually we gather together and we do great things. Drops of water formed all the valleys, the Grand Canyon, drops of water working together. All of us doing whatever we have to do in our own lane are like drops of water. And it's going to be eventually a mighty river washing away all these inequalities that we hate.
I love that. I just got chills up. May I add that to my visualization that I do?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I will
Absolutely.
think of you and thank you as I do it. That's fantastic. All right. As we're coming toward the end of the podcast, tell us where people can find you.
Okay, you can find me on sharonhh.com. That's my main website. Antiracismnewsletter.com. That is the anti-racism newsletter, obviously.
Yeah.
You can find me on LinkedIn, and my book. My book is available on Amazon and many other places. You can find it on Books to Read. That's number 2/Tired of Racism.
And I'll also, of course, share all of that in the show notes. So we'll make it real easy for people to just click and find you and experience more of the amazing work that you're doing in the world. And you talk about honoring the humanity in others being the key to equality. I hear that through every bit of what you have always shared, including today. You have figured out how to be a powerful, empowering, inspirational person who understands their gifts and the ability to use the gifts to make the world a better place and has remained so positive all the way through to the songs that you chose. It's just a pleasure to get to spend this additional time and to be on the receiving end of all of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shanti.
All right, everyone. That brings this episode of Stories We Haven't Shared to a close. I believe stories are our humanity waiting to be shared, and listening makes it possible. Thanks so much for being by our virtual campfire today. Until next time, and thank you again so much to Sharon Hurley Hall. Until next time.